Now, Agathe Habyarimana, the widow of Rwanda's former president, was arrested in France in 2010 after an international warrant accused her of involvement in the 1994 genocide. She was released on bail and lived under investigation while Rwanda pushed to have her sent home to face trial. Now, in 2011, a French appeals court refused to extradite her, noting problems with the precision of the charges and legal questions about how the alleged crimes were defined at the time. Now, more than a decade later, on August 21st, 2025, French judges dismissed the case, saying that the evidence was not clear or consistent enough to prosecute. That decision effectively closes the matter in France, even as many in Rwanda and elsewhere have continued to demand accountability for the horrors of 1994. Now, today on The Conversation, I'm joined by Timothy Longman, Professor of Political Science and International Relations in Boston University in the U.S. And also we have Modeste Nkurikiyimana. He's a journalist in Oslo, Norway. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, so let me begin with you, Timothy. Now, Agatha, has been under a French investigation, that began in 2008. And she was arrested in France in 2010. And the 2011 French appeals court refused Rwanda's extradition request. Now, please, can you go ahead and share with us your thoughts on this?
Well, her case is a difficult one. She, probably more than anyone else, helped to create the conditions for the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994. She was a very powerful individual from a family that had historic royal ties to a Hutu kingdom within Rwanda. She seemed to really hate the Tutsi minority and blame them for her family's decline. And she helped to organize a group that was very powerful, that helped to keep the president in power, and that really stoked the anti-Tutsi hatred within the country. But she also was taken out of Rwanda right at the beginning of the genocide by the French, brought to France, and it shows the difficulty really of charging somebody with complicity to commit genocide, because she wasn't in the country for most of the genocide. And even though she was the person who helped to create the conditions for genocide, it's difficult to try her on a specific charge. There's no evidence that she gave orders to kill specifically, so she's clearly complicit, but legally it's a very difficult situation to try to bring charges against her.
Well, the judges did say that there were no sufficient, charges. Can you walk us through, or our viewers through, what exactly was missing, given that, French archives and DRM reports have previously identified her as central to the presidential clique?
Yeah, it shows, honestly, that it's much easier to charge the foot soldiers who actually do the killing than the person who helps to make it possible. In her case, she really was at the center of power in the country. Her brother was a governor. Her stepbrother was a leader of one of the major companies. She had family members who were bishops in the Catholic Church. She was extremely powerful and really was at the center of the movement to demonize and scapegoat the Tutsi minority in the country, to blame them for the problems that her own husband and family had created. And yet, in order to hold her accountable, you have to charge her with specific actions that she took to make the genocide happen. And it's very hard to prove that she gave any orders. It's an issue of command responsibility that's really difficult in any kind of crime against humanity or genocide case, because you have to show that somebody actually gave the orders or gave the command. And in her case, it's more that she created the conditions and brought together the people who organized the genocide, but it's hard to prove that she herself gave any orders. So I see her as deeply complicit in the genocide, but I can understand the difficulty of the authorities in bringing charges against her. I will say the thing that I found most offensive in their decision, though, was to talk about her as a victim of a terrorist attack when her husband was killed, because that seems to be going way beyond this. She is not in any way a victim. She's somebody who helped to create conditions that led to hundreds of thousands of deaths. And in that sense, whether she's legally accountable or not, she's somebody who has a dark mark against her in history.
All right, you did say she is not a victim. In fact, she was seen as at the heart of the regime with de facto authority. Now, let's hear from you, Modeste, your thoughts, and also the fact that, you know, French investigators opened this file in 2008 and she was arrested in 2010. Now, does the length of this probe, that's over a decade, tell us anything about the difficulty of proving command responsibility in crimes like genocide?
I disagree with saying that she couldn't be considered or judged, because not necessarily somebody will be condemned or have actively contributed in this act of genocide simply because she have had machetes or killed somebody vividly. No, even somebody who instigated or called upon people to kill others. Actually, the genocide is not simply and only the fact of cutting people or killing them. In fact, there are even people who have been judged by the fact of have created the background or even promoted divisionism that led to the genocide. Therefore, the former first lady, actually, Agathe Kanziga, has been behind the creation of Akazu, and that was the system that actually led everything, divisionism, hatred against the Tutsis, and finally killed. I don't think even if she was even in Rwanda by the time of the genocide, if she was not taken outside or in France by France, I don't think if she was even in Rwanda could have killed some people alive. But her power, legacy, instigation, capabilities, and his power to organize that was sufficient for the younger generations and the people of his family or his partisan to kill the Tutsis. So in Rwanda, there is even Dr. Mugesera, who is now in jail, and he have never killed a person alive, but he has...
Timothy, Modeste did say that he believes that if she was in Rwanda at that time, that she would have killed some people herself. And we know that France evacuated her under Operation Marilis in April 1994 while the killings were happening. Now, to survivors, that looks like protection of, you know, the powerful. Does this case risk forcing France to reopen uncomfortable questions about its role during the genocide?
France is deeply complicit in the genocide. It's one of the problems of our international justice system that no one in France has ever been held accountable. They provided arms, they provided training for those who carried out the genocide. There's no question whatsoever that the Mitterrand administration bears a lot of responsibility for what happened in Rwanda. They clearly were protecting Agathe. The son of President Mitterrand was a close friend of Habyarimana's son. They used to visit the Palais de l'Élysée often, so they were very close, and they protected their own. They protected their friends. It's very problematic, and France has never really confronted fully its role in Rwanda. They've never taken responsibility for the way in which they helped create the conditions that led to so many deaths. So I don't disagree with my friend that Agathe, as well as the French, frankly, are complicit in what happened in Rwanda. My only hesitation is whether there's a legal basis for holding them. And I think it's a reflection of some of the problems with the law that we don't seem to have legal grounds for holding them accountable, at least for the laws that existed at that time. But there's no question, in my mind, of her complicity and, frankly, of the role that the French played in helping to create conditions that made the genocide possible.
Now, coming back to you, Modeste, now some of the oldest French intelligence notes, notably DRM memo of 13th March 1992, ties the presidency's inner circle to organized violence. Now, why do you think that the judges were unable to treat those archival signals differently from witness testimony?
They are not unable. They simply they are trying to protect some kind of political interest, and I wonder even why or what my colleague is talking about. It's like he's saying there is no foundation or the baseline or the foundation on which Agathe. In fact, France itself have been training them from so long ago. Those are very well documented. Those are the issues that actually Rwanda have been confronting with France, talking about the issues of its participatory activities in Rwanda during the genocide. France and the Rwanda themselves knows that. So I think the dismissal now is fueling the perception that France is still reluctant to fully confront its role in Rwanda's darkest chapter. I mean, into the
Modeste, speaking of the reluctance of France, now the court also said that some witness testimonies were contradictory, inconsistent, and even mendacious. Do you have an idea who some of these witnesses are and how much, their credibility shaped whether survivors get justice or not?
There is no right or justice given to the survivors of genocide. When the survivors actually in Rwanda now see justice delayed as justice denied, the dismissal feels like trying to protect the people, the perpetrators, while the survivors are now still suffering from trauma. So it's simply and only, the only thing that I can say about that is that France, it is not even only France, some countries, but specifically to France, there have been many people who have been themselves in the who have in the active contribution of the genocide against the Tutsis, who still there, and nobody want to touch them. So many perpetrators actually, for sure, have been tried in Rwanda and abroad, but some of the highest even level figures remain untouched, which undermines the trust in international justice. So it's not only the Agathe Kanziga. And when back to the issue that maybe the facts were contradictory and mendacious, I don't see that. Those are kind of ways of trying to belittle the facts or even to try to escape the facts. But in my perspective is that France has its own political interest. And unfortunately, when it comes to such kind of issues, France is now trying to play basing on geography rather than basing on justice, because there is nothing missing that Agathe Kanziga and his friends from his direct family have contributed in creating, instigating hatred against the Tutsis that finally ended to their genocide. I mean, the genocide against the Tutsis.
All right. Now, Timothy, Modeste said that the dismissal feels like trying to protect the perpetrators themselves. And we know that Rwanda has repeatedly asked for extradition. France refused in 2011, citing legal concerns. Now, does this ruling now amount to France effectively closing the door on the Rwandan trial?
Yeah, unfortunately. I actually don't disagree with most of what Mr. Nkurikiyimana says. I'm only disagreeing, honestly, with the limitations of the law, because this is somebody who clearly helped to create the conditions for the genocide to occur. She's deeply complicit. I think the French are deeply complicit, and I actually agree very much that the French are politicizing this, that they are things. The fact that the judges talked about her as a victim, to me, suggests that there is a political agenda that is outweighing some of this. Yeah, it's a broader problem actually with international justice. When you look at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, which tried a number of cases of leaders, they found it very, very difficult to hold people accountable for conspiracy to commit genocide. Almost all of the cases where people were found guilty were cases where people were actively involved in the killing in some way, and most of the charges of conspiracy were not held up in court, which doesn't mean they weren't guilty. It just means that it's really difficult to prove it. For me, it's a frustration with the limitations of international law. We need to have accountability, and trials are the best tool that we have, but trials are limited in what they can do. And I think the failures of this case, where you have somebody who really was behind the genocide, who really is guilty, and yet the limits of the law make it difficult to hold her accountable, I think that shows just how frustratingly blunt the tools that we have are for accountability.
All right. Now, let's come back to you, Modeste. Now, what are the next moves for the victims' lawyers, who want trial?
I can't be sure. I'm not a lawyer. Simply, Rwanda itself knows what to do, and I think that question would be asked to the spokesperson of Rwanda. What I can simply say about that is that Rwanda, I think Rwanda will keep claiming for that justice, because if France or other countries in the West keep doing so, I think that will be exposing the double standard in the international justice. Because I think it's only on earth the genocide perpetrated against the Tutsis which can be politicized, among others, and used in a sense for the political interest. You will see there are many things. Now Rwanda itself can say the people who have been killed are more than the number actually differs. You will see people will say 800,000. Rwanda will be talking about millions, but the international community is saying the different things. And I wonder who calculated more or immaculately. That's an issue. Two, there are many people who committed the genocide who now still living abroad. France, Belgium, they know them, but they can't take them into court. And when some are accused, you will see some reluctancy and treating them like, king and queens. Yet the people who survived the genocide are suffocating of trauma. So it's a kind of double standard in the international justice, which I think politics does sometimes is tricky and unfair sometimes. So I think it's a mandate of Rwanda, keep doing what they think can change what they expect to be changed, but also France. I think they both need to be fair, because justice would be justice if it is given, and the survivors wouldn't breathe as long as they keep seeing their perpetrators keep just living freely in kind of countries which are even internationally known of having good laws.
Okay.
That's my simple perspective.
All right, so let's hear from Timothy what he feels. Timothy, do you think that they can still appeal or pursue other legal routes in France or internationally?
I mean, I think it's important for Rwanda to continue to ask for justice. There are, as my colleague says, still people who were involved in the genocide who are living abroad. I personally have been a witness for the prosecution in a dozen cases in the United States, Sweden, Finland, and elsewhere for this, because there are people who escaped to other countries and got asylum and are living there. The cases are difficult to try. It's been 30 years. The people who are witnesses, many of them have died. Those who are left are living mostly in Rwanda. But it's important to continue to push for justice. I think that the survivors remain frustrated because there are so many people who have not been held accountable. The case of Agathe Habyarimana is, though, really the pinnacle of this frustration because she's somebody whom we all know was one of the key masterminds of the anti-Tutsi ideology that drove the genocide. She was somebody who really was the person who brought together those who organized the genocide and carried it out. And it would have been very interesting to see her put on trial. I haven't looked at the case deeply. I'm not a lawyer, and so I can't judge whether the French court was completely fair. I can understand why they might dismiss the case, but I actually think there may have been some ways in which you could try to charge her for complicity, and if that had been brought to trial, it would have exposed a lot of the internal workings of the regime. And unfortunately, I think she's going to get off scot-free now, and it's a shame because she really is somebody who was a major force behind the terrible things that happened in Rwanda.
All right, now Modeste, what does this mean for other ongoing cases in France or even in Europe linked to the 1994 genocide? Does it set a precedent that will make convictions even harder?
What it means is obviously that they ally still with the perpetrators of the genocide, because you shall see people who themselves will be calling the survivors, yet they are not. I was even surprised to see somebody, I don't know why he's not appearing, but there are people playing this kind of cards in the blood of people who died in the genocide of Tutsi in Rwanda. So simply, I think it's obvious that they still support the genociders and politicizing it. They are not ignorant. They know what they do. So it's absurd, simply. But yeah, as my colleague have been saying it, the perpetrators are still free in their countries and nobody wants to touch them. So this raises actually a question which is obviously or could be obviously responded. Are powerful states actually committed to justice when it touches to their own allies or history? Maybe these countries which actually have been allying with or partnering with the former regime, it's like for them, they feel like once these people get judged, it will automatically reveal the realities that have been hidden from so long. But now, honestly, justice for the genocide should not depend on geography. It should actually be justice as it is. And now that it is 30 years, more than 30 years, survivors deserve more than legal technicalities. They deserve, I think, truth and accountability. It's enough that people have played over the blood of the survivors. It's enough. It's enough. And I think what is obvious is that it has been politicized. But that is not a good model. We have been students of many things from France and many things from, of course, any developed country, any powerful country. But it's better that they also show that good faith of trying the perpetrators of genocide. The people who have been actually punished have already, some of them have already finished their imprisonment. But the problem is that they keep protecting some till this get really always harming and hurting the wounds in the hearts of the survivors of this very tragic genocide of Tutsi in Rwanda in '94. Yeah. So I think it would be time to respect the law, if there is no other kind of things people are abiding with to protect either their personal or political interests.
Okay. So let's hear from Timothy. Same question. What does this mean, for other ongoing cases that are linked to the 1994 genocide?
I really appreciate what Mr. Nkurikiyimana said about the survivors deserving more than legal technicalities, because that is really what this comes down to. And unfortunately, when you look at the ICTR, when you look at cases against Rwandans in Canada and elsewhere, there are people who the evidence suggests to me were guilty, who have been acquitted because of the weaknesses of the cases brought against them, and because of the limitations of the law. It pushes me to think about the need for something broader than just trials in the form of accountability. We need countries like France to admit their role in Rwanda and talk about what they did wrong and think about how they can change things in the future in Rwanda and elsewhere, because you can hold individuals accountable, but sometimes their trials fail. But it was the French state that really was behind this, and it was the broader Rwandan state that carried out the genocide. It was a state policy. So yes, to answer your question, I think people will probably turn to this, and say, well, if even Agathe Habyarimana can be, found to not able to stand trial for this, then how can you accuse me? I'm just a minor character. She was much more powerful. So people will use all sorts of defenses. Although when you look at the defenses, there's a lot of things they throw out. There's still a number of the defense lawyers who will argue that there was no genocide in Rwanda, which is, in my view, just shameful, and courts really shouldn't allow that. But they'll certainly turn to this, yes. It's already hard to try these cases, and I think this will make it just more difficult.
All right, let me still stay on you, Timothy, because international justice advocates have actually argued that, national courts must fill the gaps left by tribunals. So do you think that this judgment also exposes, limits in how national courts prosecute atrocity crimes?
Yeah, France has a very mixed record. They have had a couple of cases against people. They sent one Catholic priest who was very much involved in the killing in Kigali to the ICTR, but there's a lot of cases that they haven't pursued. And I think the fact that they denied extradition to Habyarimana, but then also denied her asylum, suggests the ways in which France itself is divided. There's a lot of countries that I think have difficulty deciding on these cases. Some countries like the United States don't have universal jurisdiction. That is, we can't really try these cases. The cases we've had in the United States against people are for immigration fraud, for people claiming when they came to the United States they were not involved in the genocide, and then they can be sent to Rwanda after they serve time for that. There are a growing number of countries, though, that do have universal jurisdiction, which means that they can try people for crimes committed in another country against people in another country based on international law. And that's been a positive development. The case of Rwanda has really helped to expand that possibility internationally. But the cases are very difficult, and a lot of them fail. And so I think we have to keep pushing for justice, but we also need to realize that trials alone are not going to bring the accountability that we need. There's a lot of other ways in which the world needs to look at what happened in Rwanda and be held accountable. In the United States, I look at Bill Clinton and the actions of his administration, and he had the audacity to come to Rwanda, and say, I didn't know what was happening, which was untrue. He knew what was happening. He just didn't want to act because it was politically not useful for him. And so there's all sorts of forms of complicity that maybe you can't bring into a court of law, but where people really should be condemned and criticized, and it should be publicized, and we should remember what happened and help to document it.
All right, now coming back to you, Modeste, now you've talked about, how these victims, need justice, but if you were to advise, how should France balance the pursuit of justice for the victims with legal safeguards, that protect suspects from flawed or even politically driven accusations?
I will not stand in what France can do, but simply my point is that France have not failed to judge or to try these people. This can't be the heaviest case among what France has done or finished. So I think the only thing, it's obvious, there are reasons behind not willing to try Agathe Habyarimana, and I think it's not the only case. There is a case of also of somebody who started a radio which was actually spreading the hatred, the speeches against the Tutsis, who has been for so long hunted, but finally, when it reaches these kind of cases, it's where you really practically see the relationship of what happened in Rwanda between France and some allies or the first family. So simply, it's not that France have failed or the cases are heavier. No, there are the other kind of agenda, which I think, as my colleague is stating it, which I think it's a shame. It is shameful to see a very prosperous country, a very developed country in all aspects or sectors, behaving this way in kind of these cases.
Okay. Now, we're about wrapping up, but let's hear from you, Timothy. What steps should governments, courts, and NGOs take next in order to honor these victims and also to prevent impunity? And this is beyond headlines and also beyond court orders.
I mean, I think there are things that governments can do that aren't just about putting people on trial. Seizing people's assets, banning people from travel, taking people's passports. When you have somebody like Agathe Habyarimana, she's not somebody who should be traveling freely around the world, honestly. She's somebody who, even if you can't put her on trial, is deeply complicit. And there are ways in which I think countries should be judging her and holding her accountable. There are a lot of diplomatic tools that are available to try to show the ways in which we condemn the kind of behavior that she engaged in. It isn't just law. Courts aren't the only option that we have. We have diplomacy. We have a lot of other rules. And she is somebody who honestly should be an international pariah because of the role that she played in creating the hatred against the Tutsi in Rwanda that made the genocide possible.
All right. So let's have your final thoughts as well. Modeste?
It would be better if France maybe exempt her from the case and completely ban it, or try her just maybe conclude it. Because this is the only way they used to do it, keeping somebody there, doing nothing but pretending being professional and confirming they have missed facts. The facts can't be missed simply if France goes in Rwanda or use other diplomatic ways, as professor have been saying. I think they can find evidences of anything that happened or the contribution of the first family or Habyarimana and his family, specifically the family of the former first lady. So what France is doing is simply a bad example to either Africa or even other countries, because it is simply denying justice to the survivors of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. That is simply thing that I can say in my very simple way.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and for speaking on this.